Ah, Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me and see me well? I'm not sure if it's working. Seems like I am live. Perfect. Can you guys hear me well? Awesome, awesome. Glad to see you all here. I know I've seen a comment that I didn't pick the right moment because everybody's doing a stream at this hour, but it is the way it is. I'm a busy man as well, so um, I don't want to also do it too late, as I am in Eastern time. So yeah, first, before I begin, what was it that I want to say? So please let me know, guys, first of all, where all of you are from. I'm very interested in seeing, reading the comments where you're from, the geography, where you're located. I think it's always cool to know that. Louisiana, I have two from Louisiana. Dean is from Louisiana, Sinister Silverado, John Richards is from the United Kingdom, Manchester, United Kingdom, Portugal. Nice, love it. I'm planning to do a trip soon to Portugal. We'll see, maybe within this year or next year. The Azores Island, I would really love to go there. Saskatchewan, love Saskatchewan. Lots of Ukrainians there in the prairies. New York, Arizona, all blast. That's funny. Phoenix, the great Phoenix city. Bagotville. Oh, great Canadian base there. Sweden, Stockholm. Always want to go see Stockholm. It's a great city, and Sweden is a beautiful country. Madeira, yes, Madeira Island. Isn't that in the Azores, or is I'm totally not very good with that. So pardon me if not that knowledgeable for with Portugal, but anyways, it's a beautiful country. Okeechobee, Florida. That's a cool name. Ontario Oblast. Yes. Nice. Awesome. Yeah, I'm very happy, and it's amazing that there's even one from Cambodia. That's crazy, honestly. I think Ozzy, you were in my last live stream. Thank you. Really appreciate it. It's amazing to see that there's so many people from all over the world watching my videos and even this stream. So I'm very thankful. Now, the title of this stream is called Ukraine, a Nation Reborn. Very important day today. It's the 1 year mark of this brutal war that Russia started against Ukraine. And just to start it off, I just wanted to say one thing is last year on February 24th, the Ukrainians made a choice, and it was a very important choice. Fight or flight. And the grand majority of Ukrainians decided to fight for their nation. They believed in Ukraine despite how imperfect Ukraine was and still is. The Ukrainians love their country, and they decide that they are ready to fight to the death to not allow Russia to swallow Ukraine. And that's really important. This was a very important moment in history, in Ukrainian history. And I think that it really proves yet again that Ukraine deserves to exist as a country. And now the world, a year later, understands that Ukraine deserves a spot in Europe and deserves to be respected as a country. Because many years ago, or even before 2022, hey, Ukraine Matters. Hey, Georgie. Nice to see you all here. Um, what I was trying to get to is that prior to 2022, it often happened, even to me, when people would ask, "Oh, where are you originally from? Where your parents are originally from?" And I'm like, "Ukraine," and they're like, "Isn't like this part of like Russia?" Like they won't be able to pinpoint. Like they know it's somewhere in Eastern Ukraine, but or Eastern Europe, but they would be always like, it's isn't that part of Russia? I heard that Ukraine is not even a country. Like really, like people didn't know about Ukraine as much as they do now. Now Ukraine cemented itself in the history books as a country, and honestly, like they deserve it. And so to me, that was really pivotal moment. The fight or flight, and the Ukrainians chose to fight. And also now, I'm interested in hearing from you guys. February 24th of last year, how did you guys experience it when the Russians attacked Ukraine officially? Let me know about your emotional state, how you felt about it, what you were thinking at that point. I'm very interested in hearing your experience, your testimonies in the comment section. I'll start off with myself. For me, it was around 9, 10 p.m. ish where I got a message from my brother saying that that's it. Like Russia went all in and they started hitting Kiev, Lviv, Kharkiv, all the cities in Ukraine, and I couldn't believe it. I knew part of me there was kind of a cognitive dissonance prior to this, invasion because I sort of knew that Russia would do it. I knew it, but part of my other sort of you know brain kind of didn't want to believe that it would happen, right? Like all the signs were pointing that Russia was going all in into this battle, into this massive scale invasion, but you still kind of cling to the hope that um it wouldn't happen, right? That Russia would just not do this. And when it happened, well, the realization of it, personally, I panicked. I'm a very mentally sound person, to be honest, and I've never really had any issues. But that day, I fully panicked. I had the biggest panic attack of my life for the entire night. I watched President Zelensky's address to the nation, which was super powerful. A super powerful, like 20-minute speech that he had for the Ukrainians and the Russian people. I was just, amazed that he was capable of doing that. And you could see the switch from President Zelensky as well. He switched from, being a joke, to this comedian guy that, nobody believed in, to an actual legit strong leader. And I was panicking the entire night. I had, just I couldn't believe it. My body was shaking like no tomorrow. And the next day I couldn't sleep. First of all, I barely slept. And the next day, like I remember just total body pain, total body pain, like not only mental but physical, from all this tension. Your body just like shaking, and like your thoughts are only negative, right? Because you realize that part of my culture, part of who I am, is could disappear. So yeah, that's my experience. Nothing crazy happened that day for me, but the Ukrainian people, obviously, whatever I experienced was nothing to what the Ukrainian people experienced that day when they woke up to the sirens, when they woke up to bombs in all the different cities in Ukraine, and a lot of the people had to flee, and the shock that the Ukrainian people had to go through that day, I can't even imagine it. Imagine you waking up tomorrow and you're hearing bombs going away in throughout your city where you're from, people screaming, traffic line, just a true apocalyptic scene, right? It's crazy how it would definitely damage your mental state. And the Ukrainians have been under that for the past year. So I'm interested in seeing what you guys have to say for your experience. Expected it, but still shocked at the extent, says Irene. Yes. As I said, it was a huge shock, right? Like you just, at that point before it happens, you kind of just, you're able to, how can I say it? Like you're kind of expecting it not to happen, and when it happens, it's always going to be a shock, right? Because you just don't believe it. You don't want to believe in something that's something bad that's going to happen. You don't want to believe in that. And so when it happens, it just becomes much more of a shock. Anyways, I kind of understand my words. Maybe I didn't make any sense, but yeah, I definitely felt that shock. I was swearing and stomping around my flat, a huge anti-Russian rant. Yeah. Actually, I forgot to mention to you guys, I think I did not realize, Georgie says, I think I did not realize the amount of suffering that would await me. There was an expectation in the first week that it would be over fast. Either, yeah, for sure. I had that too in the first week or two. I was talking with my family members, and they're like, no way, like, the Russian people are not going to allow this to happen. Look, there's protests. The first day, the second day, there were kind of large protests. I wouldn't say massive, but a few thousand people came out in the streets of St. Petersburg and Moscow, but they were quickly shut down by the police. But there was this expectation that the Russians wouldn't allow this to continue further for like months, and here we are a year later. And I was talking to my brother, and he was like, "Yeah, for sure. Like in 2 weeks, like Putin's gonna get deposed. There's gonna be coup d'état in Russia, and it's all gonna be over quickly." That didn't age well, but even I kind of wanted to believe that. The optimist in all of us, and I think that's what I want to say. The optimist out of all of us didn't want to believe that this invasion would happen. Um, I had a feeling from the start that Ukraine could defend itself. It was kind of written in the book. Which book are you talking about? But yeah, no, for sure. I had no doubt that Ukraine was capable of defending itself. If it was able to defend in 2014 with pretty much a non-existent army, right? In 2014, when Russia, technically took easily Crimea, but Donbass was purely the work of the FSB agents and other Russian soldiers, right? That were like infiltrating all the government institutions, buildings, and declared referendums very quickly. And then volunteer brigades, the Ukrainians volunteered to go and fight. And actually, there's one thing that didn't say, but back in 2014, Ukraine launched a rather successful counteroffensive, the anti-terrorist operation ATO. And if you guys might not remember, but I remember vividly watching the maps back in August 2014, and Ukraine was very close to driving away all the DPR, LPR forces from Donbass. Right, they were very close to Donetsk city, and it was a very small territory that these rebels controlled. But then around end of August 2014, beginning September 2014, Russia went all in with all its forces. They painted all their tanks green without any markings to pretend like they're not ours. They're little green men, and that changed the tide of the war. Ukraine was not prepared to fight against a much better prepared and much better armed Russian force at that point. It's September 2014, which then led to the Ilovaisk massacre and then the Debaltseve massacre of the Ukrainian forces, where they were not prepared to meet, the Russian forces, right? Which Putin at that point still continued to say that they weren't ours. So yeah, that's my little rant about 2014. But it's all the works of Russia, obviously. I was shocked by the helicopter gunship attacks. The whole thing was so well documented. Immediately thought Putin was a nut job. I was angry with countries that sat on the fence. Yeah, and the Obama administration and all the European administrations, including Merkel, who was that? Who was in 2014 in France? François Hollande. They had a very weak position against Russia. Basically, Putin got a slap on the wrist, right? A couple weak sanctions, a couple months later or weeks later, but it was a very weak, let's say, answer to Russia's invasion of Crimea and then their proxy war in Donbass. Very weak, and now we're paying the price for this weakness that these administrations displayed in 2014. That they couldn't get the job done and fully support Ukraine at that point of time. They didn't want to. They thought that it would be better to negotiate with Russia rather than helping Ukraine fight. It's surreal how Russians don't react as a society, how they act as if nothing is happening. Yeah, guys, sometimes I might be harsh on the Russians as of late, but in the beginning, I really hoped, and as I've said in the beginning of this stream, I really hoped that, the Russians, I believe the Russians would allow this conflict to go on for a year. I really thought that they would do something to depose Putin or rebel against their leaders. And yeah, none of that happened. And now the Ukrainians are fighting for Russians as well. Let's not forget that, the Ukrainians are not only fighting for their sovereignty, but also fighting for, Russia's sovereignty, for the people in Russia to live a better life. You just have to go outside of Moscow, 100 kilometers, 150 kilometers to find, these rural areas being without any irrigation system, water treatment plants. Like they have literally outdoor toilets because the government is not funding anything for these rural communities in Russia. The people are truly struggling in Russia, right? Especially with the current inflation and the lack of, the constant wave of dead men coming back, right? Of course, unemployment rates are going to be low because, well, your population is dying, and especially your male workforce is dying by the thousands every day. So, what do you expect? But yeah, it's very, very heartbreaking for me to think that the Russian people just don't care about doing anything for this war. I'm not discrediting the ones that are actually doing things, but like guys, they're a minority. Let's not lie to ourselves. They're a minority. Like I don't know exactly what percentage, but they're definitely less than 50%. If there were more than 50% of Russians that actively took part in putting sticks in the wheels of the Russian government, the Russian state, we wouldn't be talking about this war right now, for sure. I followed the 2014, 2015 news and MH17 investigation on Bellingcat. Yes, Ukraine was on the offensive for a while. Yeah, and they were quite successful. What with the rainy season approaching very soon, have the Russians missed the chance for a new offensive? Of course they did. Some experts are saying that it hasn't started yet. Just wait. Russia has another joker in their pocket. They have no more jokers. This is all they can do. This is their only last game plan left. Is meat waves after meat waves after meat waves. And unfortunately, guys, Russia has still millions of men in their country, and they're going to utilize that. Putin's going to utilize every single last man until they realize maybe we shouldn't go die for Putin's ambitions. But unfortunately, that's a game plan that Putin sticks with, and for now, it seems to be slightly working, more specifically in Bakhmut. But you know, you can't long term. You can't with like it's not something that they can continue doing for years. Do you think Ukraine will get Crimea back? Um, Yeah, I believe that. The optimist in me believes that Crimea can be taken back, but it also depends wholly on the support of the West, right? Ukraine needs to get the weapons necessary to be able to take Crimea back. I'm not going to be here pretending that it's going to be an easy task because it's going to be very difficult. And the Russians realize how much in trouble they're going to be. Taking Crimea back is going to dissolve Russia, right? They lose Crimea, Putin loses power. Putin put everything in Crimea. He bet everything on Crimea. He has his navy. Some of his most strongest, soldiers are there. If they lose Crimea, that's it. So Russia, you can bet that they're going to try to defend at all costs. But as I've said in a few videos back, hitting the Kerch Bridge, like kind of damaging it, especially the railway section, is definitely going to weaken the Russians. It's 100% going to weaken them. And I think that's step number one is to weaken and potentially destroy sections of the Kerch Bridge while allowing the civilians to leave Crimea if they want to go back to Russia. Um, but yeah, I have no doubt that Ukraine can take it back. It just needs the right weapons, and the West needs to continue supporting Ukraine with, and F-16s are going to be necessary. Jet fighters are definitely going to be necessary for Ukraine to be able to take back Crimea because it's a peninsula. And I bet you that Russia has a lot of anti-air defense systems. So the harm missiles that have been retrofitted to the MiG-29s right now are definitely going to be beneficial to destroy these S-300s and S-400 systems. Yeah, Ukraine needs long range missiles, right? The GLS DBs. I made the video previously. It could be something else that hit Mariupol, but they need those long range missiles. They need to be able to go 150 kilometers plus to hit these command posts, these ammunition depots that the Russians they learned, right? Remember in June, July, August, when every single day there was an ammunition depot blowing up on the front lines in Donbass and Kherson, when Ukrainians got the HIMARS systems. They were game changing. In Ukraine, this allowed Ukraine to then set off the offensive in Kherson and Kharkiv, which was super successful. And now Russia learned from their mistakes of keeping all these ammunition depots and logistical command posts and things like that very close to the front lines, and they moved them 100 kilometers away, right? 150 kilometers away. And now this is why Ukraine needs to get these long range missiles to be able to hit these command posts. They're much further away. And all these, supply routes that Russia set up much further away now from the front lines. We need to keep an eye on Georgia like Moldova. 100% agree, Lorna. I wholeheartedly agree with you. Georgia, look, the countries that are not part of NATO, that Russia started proxy wars including Transnistria and South Ossetia and all the other, little parts of Georgia, it's definitely in danger. And I have no doubt that if Russia would have been successful at taking Ukraine, last year, they would have went for Moldova and Georgia first because they're not NATO allies, right? The Baltics, Poland, it's debatable because they're NATO allies, and um, I don't know what Russia would have done, but the easy countries like Moldova and Georgia, 100%, they would have went for it. Kazakhstan, all the Stan countries in Asia, I don't think I have no doubt that Putin probably thought about it. And let's not forget, in January of 2021, Tokayev, the president of Kazakhstan, he was dealing with a lot of protests in his country, and he asked the Russian army to come help him to quiet down, or let's say oppress the people protesting against him. And he only Putin came to help him, but I think Tokayev now is really worried seeing what's going on in Ukraine, to ask again for Russia's help because he's very afraid that this time when Russia comes, it's not going to be just to push away the protesters and put them back in their places, but it's actually going to be for the grab of the entire country of Kazakhstan. So for sure, the countries that are currently not NATO allies, they're weak militarily. Putin was definitely salivating at taking them next, 100%. Uh, okay, I think Georgie, you wrote a comment. Sorry if I missed it. Here is a thought that I had today. There is non-zero chance that the Russians will be overtaken by China and Russian culture would be suppressed. This can lead to Russian language to lose any clout. That Russian will be overtaken. So for sure now, China doesn't see Russia as an equal partner anymore. Like Russia lost any sort of, I guess, influential power they had with China over China. And I think that China right now obviously is playing both sides, but they're also really interested in taking back certain territories that were taken by the Moscow Empire and the Soviet Union when China was the weakest. And I think China now remembers that moment and is definitely looking forward, once Russia comes down to a very weak position, to start negotiating Russian lands back to China. I think that's their position. Their peace plan thing, it's generic, it's boring, and I think they just kind of try to portray themselves as leaders for peace talks. But overall, China is not interested in helping Russia at this point. They might throw a little bit of weapons here and there, help unofficially Russia. But I agree that China is really interested in taking back a lot of Russian territory, and um, we'll have to see what's going to happen, but they remember history, and the Chinese people, historically speaking, have always had a very weak position of bargaining power, right? They never were a powerful country, at least in modern times, right? They constantly got invaded. They never proved themselves in military battles in modern history, and so they struggled a lot. And I think they also really remember the time when the Soviets and Moscow took advantage of their weak position. Yeah, Chinese government is such an opportunistic. I'm not going to say it, but they care about themselves, of course, right? And they're also not interested in rupturing ties with the West, right? The West is what feeds their economy. Let's not lie to ourselves that the West just needs to impose sanctions and China's going to crumble. We're going to struggle a lot as well because we're heavily dependent on China for manufacturing, and manufacturing basically, right? We've put all our eggs into the Chinese basket, and now we slowly realize that we need to pull out our eggs back into our country to be more independent, because as I've said, the West often played a sort of policy of influencing other countries with economic reforms, right? We'll invest into them and they'll just slightly and through time become more democratic. That didn't work in China. That didn't work in other countries where the West really tried to push for that. So at this point, it's really having a tough, powerful position is the only way that authoritarian regimes like China and Russia are going to respect the West. Um, my ex, a Canadian living in China, was sending me all the Russian propaganda, NATO, yada yada yada. Yeah, I mean, the Chinese people live in their own bubble, like the people that live in China. Unfortunately, they only use their own applications. They're monitored by the government, WeChat or whatever it's called. I've seen so many documentaries of like just the surveillance system that they've set up is absolutely insane. You walk everywhere in the subways and basic streets in different cities, and the government is able to track you wherever you go, right? What kind of color T-shirt you have, what kind of hair you have. It's crazy. The surveillance system is very, very strong, and they're capable of running propaganda very effectively for the Chinese people, making them believe that China is a great mighty power, and that the Chinese government never does a single mistake, right? They want to make their people believe, these regimes, that there's absolutely zero faults within the government system, right? Every decision they make is 100% always good for the people, right? That's the weak spot of these regimes, right? Because we know that it's not the case, and they always make constant mistakes because there's no strong institutions within these governments. They're just a bunch of yes men trying to get approval from their dear leaders. Thank you, Georgie. Enjoy your stream with the other guys. Thank you for being part of the stream. Appreciate it. Chris, thank you for your updates. Very well done and much appreciated. Thank you, David. China is attempting to graft the full extent of Tibet's historical borders onto its own. Yeah, it puts it pulls out the same playbook as Russia, right? We have Chinese people there, historically speaking, so we can go and grab Tibet. We can go grab this territory. They're pulling out the same playbook, and it's very dangerous because Russia does the same thing, right? They constantly use the Russian-speaking population in Georgia, in Moldova, in Ukraine, in the Baltics, in Poland, in Europe, that we need to go save them because they're under imminent threat. So we had to go and attack Ukraine because they were under threat, right? That was one of their main lines that Putin was saying, is that these neo-Nazis are about to kill our own Russian people in Donbass, and we can't allow them. So we struck first to prevent a war, a massive scale war. Absolutely ridiculous. How effective are partisans in the occupied territories in Russia itself? There is much rumor about their effectiveness. I mean, they're partisans for a reason. They keep everything secretive, right? We don't hear anything about their operations and how it's planned. So I'm sure it's very effective. And the biggest, I think, effect it has is the fear that it instills on the Russian people. The same way like the Nazis felt when they were occupying, French territory and other territory across Europe. There were always partisans within the French within France, and they never slept well because they knew that the next day their car could be blown up, they could be eating the restaurant, and they could be blown up. So I think that's the biggest factor it has, is really the fear that the occupiers have, because they thought that you guys remember first week of February 24th, these Russian convoys were actually, these soldiers were bringing their parade uniforms, right? Their parade uniforms. They thought they'd be parading in Khreshchatyk, the center of Kiev, and the Ukrainian people would be, waving, "Thank you for liberating us." They really thought that, right? But in reality, Ukrainians didn't want to have anything to do with the Russian soldiers, and that's the difference, is that perhaps in certain areas they could have been parading, but in Ukraine that's not the case. And the biggest factor is the fear that now they have, because they realize Ukraine isn't accepting them. So, US announced another $2 billion aid package today. Nice. I didn't look at the current aid package. Let me just read. I'm curious what it has. US aid package. Let me see. Drones, ammunition, aid to Ukraine. And honestly, guys, where would we be without Biden's administration? Their strong positioning in helping Ukraine fight. Honestly, the United States and all the citizens of the United States, you guys take a huge credit for helping the Ukrainian resolve. I'm from Canada, and I know that Canadians obviously can't give as much, but thank you to the United States. It's the reason why Ukraine is still able to fight right now, for sure. But it seems like it's another rather typical I'm just reading the AP News article for this $2 billion aid package. Um, if you guys 600 kamikaze drones, okay, yeah, the Switchblades. Yeah, the Switchblades have been really great, and I don't know if you guys noticed, but as of late, there have been so many videos of loitering drones, like more than I can think of. The Ukrainians have really mastered the usage of these loitering drones and also just casual drones dropping grenades from above. I've seen so many of these videos, it's crazy. And like honestly, they're really game changers because now you don't have to send in recon units to fight off these small little Russian incursions, right? You just have to fly a drone with a rather cheap bomb that costs what, like a grenade that costs $500,000, and then you drop it and you can eliminate 4 to 5 Russian soldiers easily. And even if it's one, it's definitely worth it rather than spending expensive shell, let's say a 155 millimeter shell that costs thousands of dollars. After this war, I think Canada needs drones. For sure. I think Canada definitely needs drones. It's the only way it's going to be able to effectively protect its borders. Um, we'll see if Russia's still going to be a threat in the future. But Russia has made it very clear that they're also interested in taking the Arctic of Canada. So I think that for Canada being such a vast country and underpopulated, we're 38 million people, maybe close to 39 million people, but it's just not enough to really effectively defend all the borders. And let's not forget that the majority of the Canadian population lives about like 200 kilometers away from the United States, like the border from the United States, and the north is very, very sparsely populated. Nunavut, the Northwest Territories, Yukon, barely gets close to like what 100,000 people altogether. It's so like sparsely populated, So I for sure believe that. I definitely do think that the drones are going to be the future for defense as well. Canada is surrounded by the United States. What do you think they would do if you were attacked? Oh, yeah, for sure. The United States has always been Canada's biggest defense budget, or I guess Canada has been betting with the United States to defend its borders for sure. But I think it's also important to become more and more independent and start reinvesting back into the military industrial complex that Canada once had, right? And it was a very good military industrial complex. They built, great airplanes and had a lot of joint ventures with the United Kingdom and the United States, and only after World War II, they get kind of quieted down and nobody really believed in the importance of defense and military spending after that, which now brings the Canadian Army to a very poor state, right? Old submarines that they needed to buy from the United Kingdom that are faulty, ships that are aging, barely 100 Leopard 2s. It's really not in a good state right now. Okay. What was the thing I wanted to talk as well? I also wanted to thank you, my audience, guys, because you know, you are basically leaders of thoughts for your friends, your family, your colleagues at work. I believe that most of you are pro-Ukrainian. You believe in Ukraine's victory, and I just want to thank you all because you watch different YouTube content creators that are pro-Ukrainian that talk about Ukrainian war, and you believe in Ukraine. And I have to thank you for whenever you go to work, whenever you talk about Ukraine with other people, you always push for a narrative that pushes the belief that Ukraine is a good country that deserves victory. And I think that you're also part of this informational war, right? Because the informational war is just as important as the actual battle that's ongoing in Donbass right now and in Zaporizhia. Absolutely important. And so thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Дуже дякую. Yeah. What else? Let me read some of your comments. I think MiGs are still useful. We should be retrofitting 100 MiG-29s. Just buy them from Egypt and Poland, add better weapons and radars, and they'll have long range capability. Yeah, the Ukrainians did really good wonders with the MiG-29s by fitting these harm missiles that are capable of destroying, the entire air defense systems of the Russians, right? That's absolute genius. Nobody thought this could be done. The Ukrainians did it. And I believe that MiG 29s are better than no jet fighters. So if the United States decides to say, well, we can't send you F 16s, but let's push for MiG 29s, that's still better. Because honestly, you know, Russia, everybody thought that the Russian Su 57s and 35s were like the fifth, generation jet fighters. And in the end, Russia can even produce a few dozen of them. And at the end of it, they're probably even garbage airplanes too. You know, so MiG 29s can also be on par with these modern Russian jet fighters. I believe that too. And plus, obviously, MiG 29s, Ukrainians know how to fly them, right? F 16s, there will be some time where they'll need to learn it. And we're not talking about a few weeks here. Flying planes is a whole different ballgame, which takes months, if not years. But the Ukrainians can do it in a few months. We've seen their abilities of learning things quickly, but yeah, there's a whole learning training procedure that could take months for the Ukrainians. So I think F-16s at this point, it would be too late, unless secretly the United States has been preparing pilots, and we haven't heard about it. It could be. I wish more were on this stream. It's okay. I am very thankful for any of you being here, and it's a huge day. So a lot of the pro Ukraine creators also want to talk about it, and I think that's who would have thought that Ukraine would be standing here a year later? Honestly, it's crazy. Um, I often projected that a year ago, like where would I be a year later? What would happen a year later? I would never have thought that first of all, I would have a quite good, successful YouTube channel, with people watching my videos and caring about what I have to say. I would never have thought that. And truly, the second part is that I never expected Ukraine to last so long, right? My hope, I believed in Ukraine being able to defend itself and really giving a good retaliation against Russia, but I also had my sort of, you know, my doubts. But I'm so glad that, they were thrown out the window and Ukraine still stands to this day and proves that it's a powerful, powerful nation. Belgium, thank you, Bruno. Thank you for coming in, Bruno. Appreciate it. Um, yeah, Ukrainians teach the world a lot of things. They're strong, resilient, and good workers. There's a huge number of Ukrainians living in Portugal. Yeah, and Portuguese people are just as resilient. I've worked a lot with Portuguese people, and they're very hardworking people. And Ukrainians are also a very hardworking nation. Let's not pretend that there's no bad apples in Ukraine. There's a lot of people that we wish wouldn't be in Ukraine, that are taking advantage, that are Ukrainian as well. But overall, my experience with my people is that I know that we're hardworking people, and the Ukrainians just never got a chance to really to have being on the playing field to be able to build a strong country, to have all these democratic institutions that are powerful, right? And so just because of a few people that were greedy, corrupt, that wanted to take all the power for themselves, millions of Ukrainians and Belarusians and Russians and all the ex-Soviet republics, apart from the Baltics and Poland, are really still struggling to this day from all these people that are so greedy and corrupt, and they still try to find ways to to use the vast majority of their people. I think it's disgusting. Thus, why we've seen in the last couple of weeks the scandals that have been ongoing in the Ukrainian government, right? The biggest one was with the ministry of Reznikov, where some of his ministers and his officials were found to give contracts to companies that were bringing food to these soldiers on the front lines, and they were inflating the prices of basic commodities like potatoes like three times higher than their actual price, right? Things like that. Like, come on, man! Like, it's a war and you're still trying. There's barely any money already in the coffers of the Ukrainian government, and you're still trying to steal from the Ukrainian people. That's absolutely ridiculous. And these people, like, it's not even, what frustrates me is the fact that, oh well, they lost their job. No, they shouldn't be losing their job. They should be going to jail if they're proven guilty, and very hefty sentences and punishments. This is the absolute it's like, absolute traitors in the government that need to be punished, and they need to be shown as an example for future people that thought, maybe I can get away with it, right? Because right now the messaging is very weak that, oh, I just have to step down and that's it, right? Nothing's going to happen. So for me, that's really, really important to realize that we need to also fight corruption, and Ukraine's also fighting corruption against against the Russians, against themselves, I should say, within their Ukrainian government, which is also very difficult because that's generations and generations that live through that very deep corruption. So that's that. Just give me 1 second. Okay, I just got a message from a friend. Okay, let me read some of your comments. Ukraine is cleaning house and proud of it. Yeah, it's important. It's a big job. It's a very big job, but um, at the same time, that's what happens when you have decades and decades of Russian influence, right? Ukraine has been under the Russian influence for centuries, not decades, but centuries, right? Russia treated the Ukrainian people as second, like peasants, right? Second-hand citizens, and Ukrainians always struggle under that. And there's always a few bad apples that collaborate with the Russians, Ukrainians themselves that collaborate with the Russians to make life miserable for the Ukrainian people. So it's going to be a very long fight as well for the corruption. Let's not lie and say that, oh, it's going to be very quick, right? But now is the opportunity to do as much as possible to clean up house, and I totally agree with that. It is not that the Russian system is corrupt. It is that corruption is the Russian system. Yeah, absolutely. It's the way that they've, been working. It's the way that their government has been set up for centuries, right? 100%. And corruption exists in every single government, but Russia's level is just like on a whole other plane. So yeah. What else did I want to talk about? I had a few other notes, and I remember I wrote something down that I wanted to ask you guys. Yeah. So this is my next question for you. And did you guys expect that the Russians would invade prior to February 2022? And if you did believe that Russia would do it, when did you come to that realization? I'm very interested in hearing, reading from you guys what you thought at that point of time. Okay. When they start collecting blood. Oh yeah, that's a good point. It's a very good point. Within the last few weeks prior, it seemed obvious. Yeah, for sure. To me, it was somewhere around December of 2021 where I realized, actually, Russia did a very smart thing. If you guys remember, back in April of 2021, that was the very first buildup of Russian forces in Donbass, and Zelensky talked about it. He brought the news that Russia is accumulating a vast amount of Russian soldiers on the in the Donbass region, and that was Putin's playbook. So he wanted Zelensky to announce that, oh, there's Russian soldiers, and he quickly pulled out. Right, a few weeks later, the vast majority of these Russian soldiers went back to their bases, and then he pulled off the same move, Putin, in around October, November time, when again they started building up their forces. Now, not only in Donbass but close to in northern Belarus, and yeah, in this case, Zelensky did the same thing. There were talks about it, and people stop kind of believing what Zelensky was saying, right? Like, he already cried wolf once, and then in December, if you guys remember, in December of 2021, Russia showed this video of them pulling out, vehicles out of the Kerch Bridge towards Russia, saying, "We're pulling off. See, it was just a military exercise we're conducting in Crimea and Donbass." But in reality, this was a discrediting war against Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. to showcase, look, they want war with us, right? Look at the Ukrainian people, the United States. They're saying for sure going to invade, but look at us pulling out our army, to Russia. And then, if you guys remember, in January and February of 2022, there was a lot of news articles and tweets of these so-called experts saying, look at how NATO and the West and the United States are fear mongers and they want this war to happen. And look at Ukraine that is crying wolf so many times, it's not going to happen, right? So many articles and like, influential people were saying that, it's Russia's never going to invade. And only once it happened, they had to delete all this information, right? All these tweets that aged so badly. So that was the playbook, and it really worked well because everybody was shocked, right? Putin kept on pushing his troops close to the borders, pulling them out, and he did that multiple times in order to, create this like informational battle between the West and the pro-Ukrainian side and the pro-Russian side, right? So that was a really good move from him, and yeah. I thought they would do it. Once Putin kept saying they would not, but the army remained at the border. Yeah, like it was kind of evident at, as I said, in December when they kind of displayed a small little video, but in reality, the satellite images indicated completely different story, right? So that's when I realized, yeah, it's probably going to happen, but I still, the optimist in me didn't want to believe it as well. So there was kind of a cognitive dissonance within me. Um, I wish I was paying attention. I'm not surprised though. Yeah. I just, I was following very, there was a period where I kind of stopped following the battle in Donbass. And that was between, let's say, 2016 to 2021, like before April 2021. That was like a 5 years where I wouldn't say I forgot about the conflict, but I stopped following it. I kind of accepted it, right? And the Ukrainian people also accepted it, right? By default, if Putin had not invaded Donbass, I think Ukraine, I should say, in 2022, the Ukrainians would have been totally fine with the way things are right now. Would have been prior to this invasion, right? A small proxy war in Donbass, and Crimea being Russian, right? And I think the grand majority of the Ukrainian people uh, were okay with that, right? And they kind of accepted it, right? Just like Moldova accepted Transnistria, just like Georgia accepted South Ossetia and all the other territories that Russia, by default took away from Georgia as well. But thank God that Putin, it's kind of controversial, I'm going to say, but at a certain point, it is a gift that Putin invaded Ukraine. It was the wake up call that the Ukrainian people and the West needed to realize um, who the Russians were, right, as a nation. By default, they have to carry this legacy on their shoulders, even if they didn't want to support this war. By default, they are carrying this legacy from now on, and it opened the eyes to all these Ukrainians that were perhaps more inclined to be with Russia, more pro-Russian, mostly in Eastern Europe, in Eastern Ukraine. Now they realize, holy crap, Russia's literally bombing Kharkiv, right? Russia's literally bombing, uh, Russian-speaking settlements and villages and cities all across Donbass. And we thought they were our friends. We thought that they were supposed to, back us. They were supposed to defend us. But instead, they're destroying our cities. They're looting our cities. They're pillaging everything. They're mining everything to make life as complicated as possible for these people to come back. And they're also doing all the atrocities you've seen, right? Torturing people in basements. Um, I don't even want to talk about the rapes that they've been committing, kidnapping kids back to Russia, orphans, especially in Mariupol. You guys saw the event in the Luzhniki Stadium in Moscow a couple of days ago, where they brought up the children from Mariupol to say thank you to the Russians. Disgusting behavior, and that opened our eyes to all these people that didn't know anything about Russia and who they were. It opened our eyes to who they are as a society, and it opened our eyes to the ideology that really is very close to the fascist ideology in World War II in Nazi Germany. It's Russism. It's literally very similar to fascism, but it's the Russian way of doing it. Russism, as they call it, Russism. And this ideology is is so similar to fascism, right? Destruction of Ukrainians, killing them as much as possible. I've seen images as well of them burning Ukrainian books in Mariupol. Everything that is remotely Ukrainian, they destroy it. The sculptures that honor Taras Shevchenko, Ivan Franko, all these really Lesa Ukrainka, all these famous poets and Ukrainian elites that promoted the Ukrainian ideology, they're also being removed. Um, and so that's the Russian way of doing it. That's only part of the Russism that exists. And that's really important. It's really important that the world saw that. Question: have most pro-Russian Ukrainian changed their views of Russia? Yes, they have. And if those that haven't, well, they moved to Russia. So either way, there's a cleaning up that's ongoing in Ukraine. Those people that still remain, very pro-Russian, well, they have no choice but to move to Russia at this point, right? The Ukrainians are no longer going to tolerate any attitude that is remotely pro-Russian. You can bet that. So that's the second blessing in disguise, is the fact that Ukraine was able to kind of filter away all of these traitors, these cowards, these people that work for the Russian government to discredit the Ukrainian state. They had no choice but to flee Ukraine. And those that were kind of in between, well, they realized that Ukraine is a nation worth fighting for. Mark my words, it's the end of Russian as a language in Ukraine. I, you know, I do not promote the destruction of bilingualism in Ukraine. I think it's very important and it's a strength of Ukraine. But what is important is that we shouldn't be laughing at Russians that are trying to learn Ukrainian. These Ukrainian Russian speakers that are trying to learn Ukrainian. We should be making fun of them. Oh, like you have an accent, you're funny. I don't understand what you're saying. They're making a very, very difficult step to learn Ukrainian. And also, the bilingualism of Ukraine is beautiful. I really appreciate it, and I don't think that we should be the Ukrainian state should be, destroying Russian language or trying to assimilate just Russian speakers into Ukrainian speakers, because that's the same thing that Russia's trying to do right now. The bilingualism is a strength, and it's coming from a guy that is bilingual in Canada, right? I speak French and English, and I love both languages, and I love Quebec because I'm from here, and I'm a very proud Quebecer as well. And so I think that this is a strength. Bilingualism is a strength, and we should not be persecuting people that decide to speak Russian in Ukraine. But the people that are displaying attitudes of pro-Russian ideology, they should be persecuted and they should be pushed away, right? As they say, Chemodan, Vokzal, Россия. If you're pro-Russian, grab your luggage, go to the nearest railway station, and Russia. Thank you, goodbye. That's it. People in US make fun of my southern accent. Well, it's some people make or make fun of my accent that I have, but it's the beauty, right? Like we all have different types of dialects and things like that. So it's the beauty of language, right? And I think that we should be promoting language. Language is our identity, and even the Russian people can say that they have an identity, but for now it's not a pretty identity. Ukrainian Quebec accent, yeah, it's pretty much what it is. It's a mixture of different accents that I have, slightly Ukrainian, slightly French, slightly English, slightly Russian. It's just like a little, mixture of a smoothie of languages. You have the English Quebecer accent. Interesting. I wouldn't consider me having an English Quebecer accent, but maybe. Question: what do we do with citizens in Crimea when we retake it? Well, how will the citizens receive us? Well, I think the Ukrainian government needs to do everything possible to accept the people back. It's not about then doing a revenge sort of display on these people and saying, look, you joined Russia back in 2014, we're going to punish you. It's not about punishment. It's accepting these people into our open hands and saying, look, we're different. We understand that you made a bad decision in 2014, and a second chance is always important, and they need to be welcomed. They can't be persecuted, right? Only the people that have collaborated in torturing the pro-Ukrainians in Crimea, the Tatars, because there's a very big Tatar population in Crimea that has been persecuted by Russia, that have been driven away. Families have been killed in Crimea. That is another story that's very seldom talked about. Is the Tatars that are obviously pro-Ukrainian because they were better treated by the Ukrainian government than the Russians. Um, they need to be welcomed. All the Ukrainian people that are happy to see Ukraine, and even the ones that are uncertain, there needs to be a show and a display that Ukraine is willing to accept them back, and is going to do everything possible to, bridge these differences together. That's extremely important. So I think that's the way that Ukraine should be proceeding once they take Crimea back, not from a mentality of we need to punish these people because they allied themselves to Russia. And in reality, especially the people of Donbass, they need the most love because they went through the most. The most destruction right now is in eastern Ukraine, and so I think that's really, really important is to welcome these people um, with sympathy and understanding, rather from a perspective of punishment. Exactly. Show them Ukraine is better than Russia. Exactly. You know, and the Russians, I can bet you, I know it's anecdotal, but I have some sources prior to the war in Crimea, some of the people that lived in Crimea, like back in 2021, that were saying that life is not as it's not better under Russian occupation than Ukrainian one. The Russians turned Crimea into a massive military base. The only investments they put in is into the roads and the bridge, in order for their military to move better. But apart from that, life has not improved in Crimea, and especially for the people that lived in Crimea originally, their life is a lot more complicated because now the Russian state doesn't want the Russian banks don't want to give them loans as easily. The Russian state also can discredit their lands and their houses that were bought during the Ukrainian times. So they're saying now they can pull off any type of law saying that, oh well, you bought this house and you got this mortgage when you were under Ukrainian, um, through the Ukrainian system, and it wasn't legal, so we take it away from you. And there's anecdotal stories like that I heard from people that visited Crimea and heard these stories. And just it's a huge military base at this point, right? Surveilled, and you know that's the situation, and nothing's really improved that much, right? Russia didn't come there to really invest into bettering people's lives in Crimea. It was just a pure geopolitical asset for Russia, for their Black Sea fleet and their military bases there. That's it. Crimea doesn't mean anything for Putin. It only means a powerful stronghold on the Black Sea, the Azov Sea, and that's it. It's a police state, indeed, right? If you're not pro Russian, and especially that's the last thing I want to say about Crimea. The people, just one second, sorry. The people of that are original from Crimea often talked about the sense of entitlement the Russians had on them once they started, kind of immigrating to Crimea. Kind of claiming that, oh, we like liberated you, you owe us everything, and this sense of entitlement exists to this day in Crimea. These Russians that moved to Crimea to buy property, to live there long term, are completely entitled on the Crimeans that thought they would be welcomed and the Russians would be so heartwarming to them. Instead, they get beaten up by the Russians, telling them that they owe them everything for them liberating Crimea, right? It's the reality of things in Crimea right now. Crimea is Ukraine. We NAFO already have our Crimea beach party tickets booked. Yes. And I can't wait to go to Crimea as well once it's going to be liberated. Um, let's hope it's going to be this year. If not, perhaps by 2024, Ukraine is going to be able to get the job done. Hopefully, bilingualism flourished in Quebec across both linguistic groups. Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of Quebec, and I really enjoy it. Right, I enjoy the fact that I'm a huge French supporter. I really think that in Quebec, um, French is the primary language. Just like in Ukraine, Ukraine needs to be the primary language. And then Russian language obviously has a right to exist, but it's not supposed to be, the state language, the official state language. So I think that's really important for Ukraine as well, is to push for official state language Ukrainian, and Russian is a second, language that, obviously people can decide if they want to bring their kids to Russian schools or whatever, but I think it's really important. Bilingualism is extremely important, and diversity is also extremely important. I hope I can visit Crimea next summer as an American tourist. We'll see. I hope so too. I wouldn't either. That's why I talked about those children killed in theater and 10,000 abducted. If I believe you mentioned the Mariupol theater where a bunch of people hid underneath the basement. Um, yeah, it's another sign of the brutality that the Russians had, and then they now cover it up by, you've seen the videos, right? They've completely destroyed the theater, and they cemented the foundation, the basement, with all these dead bodies probably there. They didn't even bother to pull them off the rubble. It's horrific. It's horrific. I have no words for that. These people that deserved far better fates than being, um, shoved and cemented. It's ridiculous. I have no words for that. It really breaks my heart to see the pain, um, that these people are going through. These families that had, these children there or whatever. Um, it's so heartbreaking for me. Been impressed by Kirilo Budanov. His predictions on the war have been spot on. I haven't been really listening much to Kirill Budanov, but you know what? Kirill Budanov, I have to give him a huge credits for the fact that he's one of those inspirational um, men from the current young generation of the Ukrainian people. He represents this young Ukrainian generation that wants change and wants Ukraine to be a better nation. And so I don't often watch his commentary, his videos and whatnot, but um, he's a very good leader, and I think we need to give him credit for that. Um, it's very, very important. I love Maine. Worked there for 3 years in season. Yeah, Maine is beautiful. Um, very close to Quebec. I should go to Maine. I actually never went to Maine. It's horrible that they did that and are still there. Makes me sad. Yep. Yes, I'm also French Canadian with 3 feet of snow in my backyard. Yeah, tell me about it. I just had to clean up the roof of my house, and that was such a job. There was like a whole meter of snow, and that took me like over an hour and a half to clean up. And literally, as I cleaned up the roof, the snow pile went as high as the rooftop. That was crazy. So yeah, we unfortunately have this love hate relationship for snow with snow. Yeah, lots of French heritage, of course, right? Back in the days, France colonized parts of, that we know now of Quebec, New Brunswick, Maine. That was under French governance until the British came, and then the rest is history. La Nouvelle France, as they called it. Hey, Chris, ever consider doing a joint stream with Russian dude? No. I'm sorry, and I'm sure this Russian dude is cool, and I haven't watched his videos, but I right now don't want to associate myself with, Russian people. I apologize if it might sound a little bit harsh, but that's the truth. I'm good with, I'm happy if he's doing contributing his own way. Props to him and massive credits to him, but right now I'm not interested in, doing collaborations with Russian people. I'm not interested in that. I'm originally from Pointe Claire, vacationed in Maine. Okay, cool. From West Island of Montreal. He's in Canada too for years, but I understand. Yeah, no, it's cool, and I get it. Like he's probably not even Russian at this point. He's a Canadian citizen, so it's fair enough. But I don't know, guys. I used to, remember I pointed out the fact a couple minutes ago, the fact that between 2016 and 2021, there was a period of time where I kind of forgot about the war and actually started befriending Russians again, right? Like kind of like forgetting about this conflict that the Russians started, only to be proven wrong yet again that they're liars. And I'm not saying this Russian dude is like that, but I wanted to say is that I just right now I don't want to associate myself with, even if it's a Canadian. Um, I don't know. I just don't feel like it. So I apologize. I'm sure this Russian dude is great. He's making great content, and props to him. Yet again, I'm very thankful because I'm sure that you guys, I believe you mentioned that he gives money off to the Ukrainian Resolve, but I'm good doing my own thing as well. So that's my position. That's my position. Russian dude had Ukrainian relatives too. He helps. Awesome. Very happy. Yeah. Um Thanks to United States for giving so much support to Ukraine. The EU is too slow. I agree. But the United Kingdom, Europe is realizing now that they're starting to reinvest into their military slowly but surely, right? The EU policy was always to depend on the United States. And Trump, to a certain extent, was right that like Europe was really dependent, always asking for the United States to step in terms of the military for NATO. Right, the United States did most of the hard work, and he was right about that point. Not that I'm a pro Trump supporter, because I'm not. Because now Trump talks a lot of nonsense about him resolving and doing peace talks, and tomorrow the war is going to be over. But we know that he's going to sell his soul for Putin. But he was right about that, and I think it's really important that this battle, this war, also gave a huge realization to Europe that they need to reinvest back into their armies, into their military budgets. And slowly we're seeing Rheinmetall is talking about building more factories to supply not only themselves but Ukraine with the ammunition necessary for the Gepards, most likely for the Leopard 2s, the Leopard 1s, also the refurbishments of these tanks and other APCs, and building parts of the tanks. So that's extremely important. And France as well, and Italy, every single country in Europe right now realizes the importance of reinvesting back. Poland is the biggest one. Poland purchased a bunch of K2 Panthers from South Korea. Signed a contract for 500 HIMARS systems. That's insane, but better more than not enough. And so the Baltics as well, everybody's rearming themselves because sadly, the drums of war make it so that you have no more choice. You have to do it. Ah, yeah, Trump. Do you have any Russian friends? Not anymore. And the only friends I would have would be the ones that would be pro Ukrainian, right? Unfortunately, I lost a lot of friends um, because they had a pro Russian position from high school and things like that. um I can't understand it, guys. These are people that went with me to school here in Canada. Like, they lived off the beauty of Western democracy, the beauty of Western values, right? That you can work any job, you're not going to be judged for it, you can make money, you have opportunities, you can get a great education, right? You have opportunities here. And there's still some Russian people who live in Canada that think that Russia is a great nation, that Russia does everything that they do is correct, right? I still can't understand that. Like, it's a pure cognitive dissonance ongoing within these pro-Russian Canadians, or even Americans, or even Russians themselves that immigrated to countries like the United States or Canada, right? You're profiteering from all the best in the West, and yet like you still have inclinations for pro-Russian values. It's makes no sense to me. I'm proud of Brits' help too. Yeah, the Britain is a leader. Britain was the first one among the United States and Poland and the Baltics that called out Russia back in February of last year, and did everything possible to help Ukraine arm itself up with the NLAWs, the Star Streakers. What else did it provide? Now the Challenger 2s. They want to give another. another unit, another company, I should say, of 14 Challenger tanks, the Challenger 2s. Great support from Britain. And yeah, Britain has always been a leader in terms of fighting against regimes, right? Look at World War II. Yeah, and thank you to the Polish people. If I have Polish viewers, apologies. Huge thank you because you allowed the first couple days during the invasion for the Ukrainian people to move to Poland, to cross the border, feel safe, and you welcome the Ukrainians with open hands. That's beautiful. And thank you to the Polish people. Huge props and thank you so much. Like they deserve a lot of credit here in helping Ukraine, and they were the leaders as well. They sent now they're sending the Twardy tanks, the PT-91s, if I'm not mistaken, which are refurbished T-72s. They've constantly been helping Ukraine with weapons, with vehicles, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. Poland is a true leader. Thank you, Poland. Can't stand Macron. Too much of a Putin appeaser. Indeed, yeah. He talks too much with Putin. Unfortunately, Macron still I don't know what he's doing now, but he was very disappointed in the early phase of the war, where he was constantly, giving phone calls, making phone calls with Putin. And let's not forget that prior to the invasion, I think 2 weeks before, he said that we finally reached a deal where we can achieve peace between Russia and Ukraine without having a war between both nations. Right? I think he flew to Moscow and talked to Putin on this very long table that was like about 30 meters long, and then he comes back saying that he's brokered a peace deal between Ukraine, and then that also aged very badly. The problem is he talks too much sometimes, and he needs to act more. But unfortunately, that's the diplomacy within Europe. It's the position that many countries in Europe have. They, by default, it's a good thing and a bad thing. Europe always stands by diplomacy first, and it believes that other countries will follow suit. Right? Like we can just talk with Russia and we'll find a deal. We'll find a compromise. Russia's not wasn't interested in compromises and is not interested in compromises right now. It's doubling down on their offensive. They're not interested in the peace deal. They're only interested in the deal that benefits them. Right? Like the Chinese peace plan, which is going nowhere because it's a garbage plan that is so generic and bland, right? Like it's going nowhere. Putin had him fooled, yeah, and he was very good at it. Putin, let's not forget, he's a former KGB agent. He's a master manipulator. That's the only good thing he's at is manipulating people. And so for years he's really developed, a relationship with these European nations. Look at Merkel. To this day, the Chancellor Merkel, ex-Chancellor Merkel, still doesn't want to admit that she made a mistake believing Putin and doubling down on this gas pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline. And she's now still defending herself. It's like you know that you made a mistake and you still don't want to admit it. There's a lot of these leaders that were just really weak. In back in 2014, as I've said in the first few minutes of my stream. Um, when Crimea returns home, Donetsk will fall. Yes, I agree, and I talked about it earlier in the stream that Crimea is the it's going to crumble the Russian state when Ukraine grabs Crimea back. The Russian government is going to dissolve very quickly. So I was planning to do the stream for about an hour and a half, so we have about 10, 15 minutes. What else did I want to talk about? I wrote some points. Choo- 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 choo. Yeah, the last point I wanted to talk about is the Ukrainian debt. We're very, we're talking a lot about how Ukraine's getting help, but this comes at a very, costly price for Ukraine. Ukraine is getting indebted every day, every day, right? The United States gave a $2 billion package. Of course, it's not going to be free. um, and all the reconstruction that's going to be necessary for Ukraine. It's now close to $1 trillion, if not more, in the rebuilding effort of Ukraine and all the loans that Ukraine is getting right now to continue working, functioning as a state, right? And of course, they're not giving for free. I think that's the elephant of the room that we don't often want to talk about because it's kind of making money off the blood of Ukrainians. And I am a very big believer that this debt, especially the military debt, should be written off by the West, because Ukraine right now is not only protecting its sovereignty but protecting, defending Europe, and it's done a very mighty job at doing that. And it's considering that the West, didn't have to spend out of their way to help Ukraine defend itself. It needs to be written off. If they don't want to do that, then the Russian seized assets need to be paying off the entirety of the debt. Now I think it's close to $100 billion, something like that, maybe more. And how many yachts, how many mansions, how many condos and apartments do these oligarchs and these elites in Russia have in the West? How many of these bank accounts in Switzerland have they opened up? How much money did Putin stash in London and Switzerland and Cyprus? Very interesting to knowing that. But that's the money that should be paying off right now, all this debt, in my opinion. The Ukrainians shouldn't be also then struggling to pay off a debt for like decades. That's not fair. It's not fair because we know what Russia would have done had they grabbed Ukraine. They would have went for Moldova. They would have went for Georgia. They would have went maybe for Poland to Kaliningrad, through small Baltic states, right? Through Finland. Who knows, right? They were ready to do it all. I have no doubt about it. So Ukraine shouldn't be taking also the responsibility of paying this debt with a higher interest rate, because we know right now the interest rates going super high due to the recession and this massive inflation. That these loans that are given to Ukraine are absolutely gigantic, and Ukraine is just going to be able to pay off the interest itself without paying the capital, the principal. And that's going to be ridiculous. I think that it should be written off, forgiven, especially the military assistance. And for the reconstruction effort, the Russians need to be tabbing. They need to be paying the bill for that. And the check only gets bigger every day as they continue destroying Bakhmut, they continue destroying Donetsk, they continue destroying um, Avdiivka, Kharkiv, Kiev. They are going to be the ones who need to pay the bill. And the check only gets larger for the Russians. And the first step of it is seizing every single Russian asset and not debating what we're doing with it, not only freezing them, but using them actively to give them to the Ukrainian people. And we also need to realize the faster this is happening, this means that the Russians now have to not only pay for their war that they've started, but they also need to pay, and they're paying for Ukraine's reconstruction and military effort to defend themselves. So it's going to make the Russian state crumble even faster than before. And that's also going to fuel internal conflicts within the Kremlin, because the oligarchs don't want to have their money being used for reconstruction effort purposes. Why are they stashing it in Geneva, in Zurich, and Cyprus, and in London, or New York, or whatever, different bank accounts? Because they know that they want to profit in the West. They want to enjoy this money in the West, not in Russia. So that's extremely important. And let me know what you guys think about what I said. Debt forgiven is one thing, and rebuilding infrastructure another entirely. Winning and paying the piece should be thought about it now. Yeah. Well, right now, there's a lot of discussions how this reconstruction effort is going to be set up. But yeah, now is also the time to start planning that, because as the war drags on, the rebuilding effort is going to be massive. It's like going to be another Marshall Plan, except it's only going to be in Ukraine, and we need to start talking about it and how it's going to be funded, because Ukraine can't be taking these massive loans from the IMF or other banks when there's already open sources that they can use, specifically seized Russian assets, right? That needs to be actively used in the rebuilding effort, in my opinion. Okay. I worry some of these arms manufacturers will saddle Ukraine with some useless weapons. I'm not really sure I understand what you mean, Paul. I mean, Ukraine is getting pretty decent weapons as far as I'm concerned. The Leopard 2s, the Leopard, even the Leopard 1s. Um, I wouldn't say they're giving Ukraine the best, but they're certainly good enough to fight this garbage Soviet era uh, vehicles that Russians have started pulling off on the field, like the BMP 50s at this point. They have T-62s and a few modernized T-72s, the T-90s, which are basically glorified T-72s modernized, but they're still garbage because they have this autoloader problem. with the turrets, flying, higher than the SpaceX into in space, right? So it's good enough to fight the Russians. I think, yeah, I agree that all the foreign Russian funds should be used to rebuild Ukraine, and the rest should be obtained by reparations by Russia. Agreed. Thank you for agreeing with my point. Yeah, so that's about it, guys. I think I'm gonna finish the stream right now. I thank you all for being here. I thank you all for being present for the stream. Uh, I'm really happy that I have such a great audience. And really, guys, as I've said in the beginning of the stream, you guys are extremely important because you also push a voice of reason to the people that might not know a lot about the Ukrainian conflict right now, and want to get more information. And you guys, it's probably not only me you're watching. You're watching maybe the Russian dude, right? And I'm sure he makes great content. I don't watch him, but Georgie from Ukraine Matters, Denis Davidov, Jake Bro, Perun, right? Perun makes great documentaries. Um, they all make very great content, and you guys push these types of information, these ideologies to your friends, right? Saying that, Ukraine didn't start this battle. Ukraine wanted a peace, but Russia had no choice, right? And I'll quote this thing. I watched an interview with a very smart historian. His name is Stephen Kotkin, and he's a Russian historian. And most specifically, he focuses on Stalin, the Stalin-Lenin era. But he was given an interview recently, and I really liked what he said. Russia is, if it was like your neighbor, you have a small little house. Ukraine is a small little house that has about, 10 rooms, but Russia is a house that has 1,000 rooms. And the owner of that house that has 1,000 rooms, thus Russia, comes within the Ukrainian house that has 10 rooms and occupies two of them. And then at the same time, he continues to destroy the other rooms, telling the Ukrainian owner that, well, I deserve these rooms. I need more of them, right? I need them for space purposes, and they're mine. Meanwhile, he already has this massive house with 1,000 rooms, Russia, and he's still greedy, and he wants more and more and more. And that's what Ukraine has to deal with right now. Is a very terrible neighbor that is not going to stop, and he's going to continue trying to grab as many rooms within that house as possible because it feels always threatened. But in reality, it's just a greedy neighbor, right? Russia's massive enough. What do they need this land for? They've never been under the threat of NATO and the West. you know, like, we need to realize the West tried to invest within Russia. They tried to believe in a Russia that would be successful, right? Look at all these brands that left Russia: Nike, McDonald's, Starbucks, Boeing, Airbus. The list goes on. But everybody wanted Russia to succeed. They believed in it, and Russia just lied it to our faces. So that's the unfortunate truth. So thank you guys. Thank you for the stream. I appreciate you guys being here. Keep on supporting my channel and the other channels, whether it be the Russian dude, Georgie from Ukraine Matters, Denis Davidov, the Ukrainian content creators. Keep doing that, and I really am thankful. And let's hope that I'm not going to have to do this stream 1 year later, and that there's going to be swift Ukrainian victory in the next couple months. Thank you. Take care, and Slava Ukraini.